A remarkable shakeup in the 2024 presidential contest Sunday afternoon, just a little over 100 days before the election. To talk about President Biden's decision and what to look for in the days and weeks ahead, we're joined by Dr. Michael Binder, political science professor at the University of North Florida and director of the school's Public Opinion Research Lab. Good morning, Dr. Binder. Dr. Binder is joining us via video link, and we may have to dial him back in just a second. We're also joined on the line by Dr. Nick Allard. He's a veteran politico and founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law. Good morning, Dr. Allard.
Good morning. Good morning.
So we also want to hear from you, our listeners. How do you think this is going to change the race? Will it impact how or whether you vote in November? You can reach us on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Dr. Binder, 1:46 in the afternoon yesterday, and everything changed with a tweet from the president. He said it was in the best interest of his party and the country to step down. How surprised were you by this news? Dr. Binder, I think we still aren't having you here. Dr. Allard, I'll ask you the same question. I mean, was this a surprise to you? Were you shocked when you heard it, or was this something that you anticipated?
I think most everybody that I've spoken to was expecting it, and it became inevitable. And it took some time, but not surprising.
Yeah.
But it is dramatic and shocking in the sense of like a jumpstart of the party's efforts to win the nomination.
So you have a long history in politics. You spent decades in D.C. You worked on many presidential campaigns. You attended many party conventions, both parties. How do you think the party moves forward with Kamala Harris as the presumptive nominee? Do you expect that is a shoo-in, or do you think that that's going to be challenged?
Well, guilty as charged in terms of that experience. But I am a law dean, and we're welcoming these new legal constitutional scholars in our third class. To answer your question, Ann, and thank you for having me, there is a process. It's very straightforward. There'll be at least two ways that the party's nominee will be formally chosen. One is if they decide to have a virtual, in 2 weeks, a delegate vote, or at the convention, and we're taught by this that conventions really matter. I'm expecting, I'm not a betting man, but I'm expecting that they'll wait to the convention to let the support build. But, I think we've been taught in the last couple of weeks that anything can happen in this particular race, anything at all. So two formal ways. It's an open process. It may be a bit disorganized and noisy and sloppy, but that's democracy. It's the sloppiest and worst of all systems until you consider the alternative.
We're already getting some calls. Herman on the South Side. Good morning, Herman. Go ahead.
Good morning, and thanks for taking my call, Ann. Good morning, gang. Going to be real quick. My headset is going out, so I'll ask my question, and hopefully you all can get it as well as do some polling on it. If Vice President Kamala Harris gets the nomination for the top job, the most powerful job, we say in America, how is she going to fare with the electorate of the Jewish community, the Catholic community, the Episcopalian Lutherans, and also the Southern Baptists? Is she going to have enough juice, enough mustard to be an attraction? Will she be a turnoff? I'll listen. Thanks for what you do. Have a wonderful Monday.
Thank you, Herman. Dr. Allard, what are your thoughts? Is there any kind of religious implications in terms of her appeal across the political spectrum?
Herman, thanks for handing that extraordinarily apt and complex question. So the answer to the question is we will see, and it'll be up to her if she's chosen as she's the presumptive, it's hers not to win, she prevails. But the fact is, I think we can have good faith in the judgment and decency of the American people to make their decision in the choice that they'll have between the candidates. We have, with respect to the Jewish vote, she is married to a Jewish gentleman. who will move from the second gentleman to the first gentleman if he is elected, and he'll be the first gentleman, so that'll be historic. And so, yes, we live in a very contentious, tough time, but hopefully the voters will be voting on the merits, on the issues that they care about, and they'll be judging with their eyes, their ears, and their hearts about the choices they have and who's the best candidate. So I'm not trying to give you an evasive answer. With respect to the religious issue, I have an article that will be coming out in the Jacksonville Daily Record beginning of the month about love, and that addresses religious freedom in our country, and we have a long history, and it's embodied in the great First Amendment of religious tolerance, religious protection, and that Jefferson, for example, made it very clear in a letter supporting the Baptists of Connecticut in 1802 on January 1st, who wrote to him for help because they were concerned of the discrimination and the lack of the support of the state legislature for their inalienable rights. And Jefferson wrote to them that in the very first part of the Great Amendment, the First Amendment, designed to protect Americans from abuses of power of government, that the First Amendment created a great wall between church and state. So I think we can be very hopeful and go along for the peaceful transition of power once the American people at the ballot box have expressed their decision.
I think we do now have Dr. Michael Binder on the line. Thanks for sticking with us on those technical difficulties. And good morning. I want to ask you how you see this contest shaping up, if it is in fact between Kamala Harris and the former President Donald Trump. Who do you think? What strategies are you seeing emerge already, and how do you think that that's going to shift, if at all?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that are going on, right? One, in Trump world, they are reacting quickly to try and attack her. This is a circumstance where they were winning the race, they were well ahead, they were poised for victory, and then the entire ground under which they were working completely shifted. So if you're in Team Trump right now, this is not something that you wanted to see have happen. Conversely, if you're on the Democratic side and you were really nervous about Biden's ability to win the election, this gives you a shot of energy and a little bit of hope. But from the current vice president side, Kamala Harris, she now needs to go into, okay, I'm going to try and lock up my party support. And you're seeing that, whether it's the Clintons or even President Biden or other governors like Beshear or Whitmer come out in support of her. Now she needs to lock that up because she needs to get the nomination before we can think about a Harris versus Trump election.
To your point that there are some very prominent Democrats that have not yet formally endorsed her, Nancy Pelosi and former President Barack Obama among them. What do you think is the calculus there? Do you believe that's because they ultimately don't have that immediate support for her, or are they trying to send a different kind of message?
Well, I think it's also true that, you might want to just take a second and exhale, right? This literally just happened less than 24 hours ago. You don't necessarily need to make the snap judgment. You don't have time to run a primary between now and the end of August. It's just not feasible. So this is going to have to be decided at the convention or leading into the convention. I think it's wise to just sit back and see how this plays out, see if there is somebody that comes out of the woodwork that maybe can garner some support and create a wave of enthusiasm. I don't know that person exists, but I can understand why Obama or Pelosi might just, wait just a day or so before everybody goes all in on Harris.
If you're just joining us.
Ann, may I jump in on that?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, first, it's a relief to have a real expert on be able to be connected. So, Professor Bender, I agree wholeheartedly. I just wanted to add two things. And I'm just astonished, actually, by the commentary that acts as if there's not enough time and, that somehow this is a deficiency. So we're living in an age of constant turnover, and look at all the rapid changes that have happened. There's 106 days to the election, and there's plenty of time to get things lined up. And the support seems to be on an accelerated basis falling in line. Now, with respect to the shock and surprise and trying to make chicken salad out of chicken something else, chicken poop, I think, about Obama and others, prominent Democrats, they're doing exactly, from a political point of view, the right thing, and they're stepping back, and rather than trying to impose a backroom, top-down type of election feel, they're allowing people to socialize and get their arms around the decision and for the support to build. And so I'm not at all surprised. In fact, I don't think that Obama in the primaries ever picked a choice. I could be wrong about that. Now, the Clintons have come out and supported her, but Biden and not Biden, the House leadership has held back. However, even today, very prominent House leaders, Peter Aguilar and Catherine Harris. Aguilar is the caucus chairman, and Harris is the whip, the Democratic whip. They've come out, and so and many state Democratic governors have already indicated that
Dr. Allard, I want to get to some phone calls here and also remind people we are talking to Dr. Nick Allard. He is the founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law. We're also talking to political scientist Dr. Michael Binder from the University of North Florida. We're taking your calls and comments, and if you want to reach us on air, you can call 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect or reach out on social media. I want to take a call now from our friend Stanley on the north side. Good morning, Stanley. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Well, good morning, Ann. First of all, I am impressed with Biden and what he had a decision he has made. Number two, I support the vice president to be president. We have enough time to work things out and to get everything in line. But Harris should be president, and then they can pick a man or a woman from the Democratic Party to get it done. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
All right. Appreciate you, Stanley. I also want to move to a call from Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Good morning. My question is the Republicans are probably going to try to interfere somehow with the process, like the campaign funds being transferred from Joe to Kamala, and also, is there any other way they can interfere with this, with the transition or the selection? But if they do sue, I know it's a question for the courts, but do you think they'll have? Does Trump himself have to sue, or will, if anybody sues like a PAC or anything, will they have any kind of standing to sue? But with the courts packed for the Republicans the way they are, it's so up in the air.
Good question, Charles. Thanks. Dr. Binder, I want to ask you about that in terms of the money that exists in the Biden-Harris campaign fund currently and what happens to that. I know that they interviewed a FEC commissioner on NPR this morning, a Republican, a Trump appointee, suggesting that that may not just be a rubber stamp in terms of allowing her to access those funds.
I mean, my understanding is it's entirely a rubber stamp, and they've already renamed it, and they've already reached out to the campaign and indicated that they're working for Harris now. And even if that were the case, that somehow that wasn't just a rubber stamp, that money can easily be transferred to a PAC and be used for almost essentially the same things. She'll be able to raise enough money quickly. They raised a bunch of money yesterday. Money in politics has no problem getting where it needs to go. That's one thing that's abundantly obvious on both sides of the aisle. And as for kind of the Republican interference in this process, it's just a matter of, what the opposing political party will say and do on television. There's really nothing legally that prevents any of this from happening. Then the names don't have to be submitted until after the convention anyway. We are almost 4 weeks away from the Democratic convention. There's more than enough time to do this. This is not a problem, Ohio notwithstanding. This is, yes, unprecedented that it's so late in the process, but not unprecedented in the sense that for over 150 years, we did this by convention at the convention. So it's just kind of a hearkening back to the previous times in some ways.
We have a comment from Joss on Facebook saying Kamala Harris's favorability ratings are in the gutter. I doubt the Trump campaign is shaking in its boots right now. And in fact, Dr. Allard, polling does show that her, favorability ratings were prior to this decision by the president, less than 40%. Do you think that that's changing? How do you see her standing? Will it improve because of this apparent assignation of her, role in the election?
Well, the Florida Panthers came back from 3-0 to win the Stanley Cup, so I think that the American people are used to dramatic comebacks. I think all the polls can go out the window, and what counts will be the voters in the election in November, but also the polls will be completely different now. It's a completely different calculus. Now, that's not a legal view. That's a political view from an amateur, so you can take it for what it's worth. But with respect to the challenges and dismay, I think that the concern, because, in effect, Donald Trump and many of the Republicans are basically accusing the Democrats of plotting to nominate a winning candidate. And there's been some suggestion of legal challenges and, so on. But the legal challenges really would not be precedented. Trying for one party to interfere in the other party's internal selection, there's other recourse. But unless you get a judge reviewing a case who pays no attention to the facts or precedent, I don't expect those to prevail. The other mechanism, which addresses a direct concern, I hope I have time to say this, but there's a direct concern that's expressed out there about why hasn't Biden been removed before. The 25th Amendment is the amendment to do that, but it's unlikely that's available if, as people are concerned, he becomes really not fit to serve. Right now, he says he can serve, but he's not fit to run or to serve following on. But if it becomes apparent or something happens where he's not fit to serve, there is the 25th Amendment. But those who seek to suggest that Biden should leave right away should be careful what they wish for, because that would put Harris in office. If the House prevails and brings an impeachment movement, for example, that's not likely to succeed at all. But if they do, they should be careful what they wish for, because then Harris would be running as president. In my opinion, it would be an advantage for her.
Dr. Binder, I'm curious how consequential ultimately you think his COVID diagnosis was. I know that for the Democratic Party, the pressure has been building since that disastrous debate, but he was sidelined this week, unable to leave his home in Rehoboth Beach and basically unable to respond publicly to a lot of the continuing pressure. Do you think that ultimately that played a role?
I think personally it may have. It may have given him the opportunity to sit back and soberly look at where things were and the state of the race. And it gave people an opportunity to sit him down, right? Because when you're in the heat of the campaign and the heat of being president, that's a full-time job times 5, right? I mean, you're constantly on, and you might not be able to sit back and get that big view from up above, and maybe being housed away in Rehoboth may have given him that opportunity, and it certainly gave the opportunity for some people to come down and talk to him a little bit and get him on board with this process. So I certainly think it played in, although it may not be the direct factor that maybe some folks are thinking.
Before this happened, Dr. Binder, we were going to be talking to you today about Amendment 4, which is the abortion amendment in Florida, which would make abortion legal up to the point of viability instead of the 6 weeks as it is currently. How do you think that Kamala Harris's, outspoken position as a representative for the Democratic Party in favor of legalized abortion will impact Florida voters?
Well, I think it'll help the yes on 4 vote. And I also think this is something that can potentially invigorate the left on this issue. Biden he was pro-choice, but he was not nearly the outspoken advocate that Kamala Harris is. And you'll see this more and more as she begins to campaign, that'll be kind of the hallmark foundation of her campaign. So it'll bring a lot of attention to the issue. And it's an opportunity for her to really draw some contrast, particularly maybe not so much with Trump, but certainly with J.D. Vance and some of the things that he's been saying. So I think it brings the issue more to the forefront, and it brings more attention to it, not just in Florida, but across the country.
And Nick Allard, how can you describe the early shaping of a race that some are comparing to, or not comparing to, but specifically saying it would be a former prosecutor versus a convicted felon? Do you think that that's a narrative that, if she does continue as the nominee, the choice of the Democratic Party, do you think that that will be a dominant narrative?
Yes, I think that will become. It's already in the Democratic ads that we've been seeing already in less than 24 hours. So I would expect that to.
Do you think
be a big
that's
theme.
do you think that's effective? I mean, you run the JU School of Law. There's a lot of constitutional discoveries we've made in the course of this election cycle, not least the Supreme Court decision recently about presidential immunity. But how do you think that plays into appetite for that discussion amongst amongst voters?
Well, that's a very tricky question because after some of the events, the Black Lives Matter movement and concern about police overreach and so on, Harris backed away from touting her experience as a prosecutor. But I think if you take a step back from the particular law and order amendment, a law and order issue, or the specific amendments, the larger question is it conveys to the electorate the importance of the White House, the president, having the choice over the Supreme Court nominations. And so that will be on people's minds, from all across the political spectrum, about what's at stake here is really control of the Supreme Court, which has had such an impact on constitutional law. So I think the more significant factor of her former experience as a prosecutor is her ability to prosecute the campaign. And I'm just wondering how Donald Trump will react to campaigning against a woman of color, and a former prosecutor. And, it's going to be very interesting to see whether how he's able to do that, and actually whether she's able to successfully tackle all the formidable skills that he's demonstrated in his efforts to take down a lot of very impressive other candidates who have tried to oppose him, either in his own party or President Biden.
I've got an email from Tara. She says, I know this is very unlikely, but I'm curious what your guests think about the possibility of Harris choosing a moderate Republican as her VP candidate. I think Harris replacing Biden will engage the younger vote. Would a Republican vice presidential contender engage the center in a similar way? What do you think about that, Dr. Binder? Any chance of that?
Let's see, no. 0 and none is my guess for the chance of that, right? The Democratic Party is making this choice, and I think you're much more likely to see somebody far left than a Republican, although I do think that you're probably more inclined to see maybe a moderate. And, if we're thinking about who her potential VPs might be, there's talk of some folks like Shapiro of Pennsylvania or even Beshear of Kentucky. But, one of the more interesting choices that I would see would be Whitmer of Michigan, where you would potentially have 2 women on the ballot, and you can go all in on women in 24. I think that would be a really appealing and a very interesting, if potentially, risky proposition, but it'll be an opportunity to help with Michigan, and which is a crucial swing state for Democrats.
I want to ask you, Dr. Binder, as well about the issue of gender, because we've already seen some comments come out that relate specifically or sort of generally to the fact that she is a woman candidate for president and whether people would be receptive to that. But gender is also a very difficult issue for the former president, Donald Trump. And I wonder, politically speaking, how you think his supporters and his the party will address that issue in a way that doesn't create additional friction for the former president?
Well, I'm not sure that Donald Trump shies away from friction, and I think a lot of the things that we might think about that are political third rails or are detrimental to political campaigns, in a lot of ways have only strengthened his support amongst his base. Now, what that means for the swing voter in Iowa or the swing voter in Pennsylvania or Arizona, that's a different question. But I don't think his base would be impacted by much of anything that he would say or do in regards to gender and women at all. But there's certainly room in Middle America for for movement here on this issue. And I certainly think we've seen a growing gender divide in the vote, more so than ever before in a lot of places. And it's certainly. Listen, our country has a lot of problems, racism and sexism among them. But I certainly think it's an opportunity for Democrats to lean into that.
Nick Allard, I want to ask you just briefly about the down ballot races and what impact this could have on them. We'd seen some polling that people who were elected officials who were supporting Biden and who were vouching for his mental capacity were starting to see that ding their own popularity ratings or their own favorability ratings. Do you think that the fact that he's out and someone else, maybe Kamala Harris, is in, will have a beneficial effect on down ballot races for Democrats?
Yes, I do. I think the energy and interest and what is at stake is going to drive turnout. And I think this transforms in 24 hours the diminishing prospects that the House would change, that the Senate would the diminishing chance for the Democrats to take over the House, at least, and the Senate's much tougher, but it also has an impact there. So to answer your question, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think it'll have a big impact.
Well, I know this is a topic we're going to continue to be talking about in the weeks ahead. Dr. Michael Binder, Nick Allard, thank you both so much for being on the program today and helping us sort through some of this news.
Thank you. It's a
Thanks
privilege, and Michael, it's a pleasure to be with you.